Hello guys, and welcome to this week's episode. So as we discussed last week, we have a certain procedure of how we'll be doing things. So today I will be taking you through starting up the Boeing PMDG Boeing 737 from cold and dark startup all the way to getting it ready for taxi. So over here we've got beautiful FSDG scenery for Nairobi. I'll put the links on where you can get that on the description below. This is the JKIA FSDG scenery. They've done a very good job. It's actually currently one of the best-selling FSDG sceneries. So if you're looking to enhance your Microsoft's flight simulator experience, I strongly recommend that you go ahead and get this scenery. Let's just have a look at various views. Okay, let's just cycle through some of the views so that you can see. That is, we are currently parked at gate 13, which is a medium gate. So you can see that's how gate 13 on the international departures looks like. So today we will be taking off to Entebe. So we're just going to get the plane configured for that. So the plane is cold and dark. You can see I do not have the ground animations yet, but hopefully by the next video I will have all that set up. We're going to be using GSX ground. Hopefully by the next video all that will be set up, so the door is wide open. Yeah, so that's pretty much the scenery for the FSDG Nairobi scenery. Alright, so let's get started on firing up this Boeing. Now, depending on there are various ways of getting this plane powered up from cold to dark. So in this particular video I'm not going to use ground power. We're going to use the APU, and I'm going to basically take you through the most basic, fastest, simplest way to get it started up and configured for operation. So depending on your organization or many airlines or many companies have different standard operating procedures, which may vary the different ways in which we can get the aircraft fired up. So I'm just using one of the default standard operations, which you can use on the PMDG Boeing 737-800 on getting it started. So I'll just get started. So with all that said and done, let's proceed. So typically, just like the previous aircraft we reviewed, which is the Dash 8, the startup procedure consists of flows whereby you basically go from one segment all the way up to the other, all the way down, all the way up, and basically follow a set of configurations that you need to make. So in my case, I'll be using a similar kind of approach, but I'll try and simplify it as much as possible so that we just have the bare basic minimum that we need to do to get it fired up and started. But of course, as you advance and you're given more standard ops depending on the different companies that operate these aircrafts, then there may be additional tasks that you may have to do in order to fully comply with how to get it started up. So We'll start with the DC panel. That's the direct current panel over here. We start by switching on the DC power. Now we are on battery power, so we have to make sure we get the APU started so that we don't finish up the batteries. So we start by putting on our position lights so that people outside can know that we are getting ready to fire up the plane. I usually turn on the forward fuel pump before I turn on the ACU. It's a procedure that I usually use. So once we turn that fuel pump on, we don't necessarily need to turn all the fuel pumps, so we just turn that forward fuel pump for now. Then we turn on the APU and we monitor the exhaust gas temperature. So after some time, you'll see the needle will deflect all the way up. So we usually wait for it to deflect all the way up and then come back down. So basically that just means that the APU it's using the battery power right now to fire up itself so that it can get running. So it's basically warming up and everything. And once it's up and running, we'll get an indication here. It will turn blue, telling us that the APU is now on the bus. And then from there we can basically start using the APU as our power source. You can see now it's turned blue, so the APU generators are on. So basically now we will select our power source as the APU. So that way now we are not using the battery, we are actually using the APU. Right, so now that we have our APU running, we don't need to worry about draining the batteries. So now we can proceed with the rest of the startup. So we switched on the battery switch. Now we just perform a fire test. So there are several tests that we can do here. Let me just adjust this and see our best view here. So typically we'll perform the fire test. We will start with this small button here, which will detect any faults on the APU anywhere. So we move it to the left. Basically we can detect any faults there, and then we move it to the right, and that's the fire alarm you can hear there. And then we go ahead and check this. We make sure we've got 3 greens on both sides. Then from there we turn on our hydraulics. I'll just go to the overhead panel. If you look here, we're assuming at this time the first officer is doing a walk around. So we turn on the hydraulic panels, and they'll be able to inspect what's happening from the outside. So I'll just cycle back to center console view. So then from there we do a cargo hold test. So we do that by pressing down this. You can hear the bell. We've got 2 greens. That's how basically we check for whether the fire detection in the cargo hold is working. So then from there we go to make sure that we go to our overhead panel. In our overhead panel here, we make sure that our me just zoom out. We make sure that our emergency external lights are armed. So our emergency external lights are armed. We check our attend button. That's for calling the flight attendants. Assuming that the fueling has been done, in this case, we've already got our fuel preloaded, we can turn on the fasten seatbelt signs. This is the chime, for calling the flight attendants. So once we've done that, we move on to our flight recorder. We give our flight recorder on and off test and see whether that works. Our flight recorder test button is here, so this is on the overhead panel. So we just push it all the way there. That's just basically to make sure that your flight recorder is working. So then we'll do our mark indicator speed. That's basically telling us whether we are overspeeding. Basically the mark detector, the airspeed warning. Then we'll do a stall warning test. Basically when we're stalling, sometimes, okay, one thing with this stall warning test is on the PMDG, you may encounter this as you're performing this test. Sometimes it may not make a sound. I don't know why it does that. That's probably a bug with the PMDG. I'm not sure. Maybe you can comment below and tell me the reason why that happened. But for some reason today it's working. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So that's how you basically check for the stall warning test. So we turn our service interphone on. This is basically for communication with the ground crew. Then we align our IRS so that we can start programming our FMS or FMC. So it usually takes about 8 minutes or so to align. So basically you just give it some time for it to align. So that's about it. So now we will move on to our FMC. So because our this tutorial does not specifically focus much on the FMS or the FMC, that will be in our next video, which goes into detail on how to do that. I'm just going to carry out this step. I'm just basically going to perform this, the general things that we need to do. So here we're just going to set our IRS position. I'm not going to go into too much detail of programming the routes. I'll just basically set it up and then we'll go into detail on how to program the seeds and stars in our next videos. So I'll just do the basic FMS configuration. If we check our indent here, we can see, if we click on the indent button there, we can see our latest AIRAC. Basically, the FMS settings cycle that we are currently on, you can see it's up to date there. So it's usually revised after a couple of months. So right now you can see we are on the June 18th to July 16th. You can get this from PMDG. You can usually just update this directly from the PMDG site. I'll put the links of where you can get that on the description below. So from there we go to initialize our position. We are parked at Jomo Kenyatta HKJK ICAO. at gate 13. So we go ahead and click on that button and click on that button. So basically now the aircraft knows where it was. If you can see at the top here was its previous position, which is still JKIA. So yep, that's how we go about setting our IRS position. So I'll just quickly go into setting the route. I'll explain more of how we do this in the next video. Right, so now we're done configuring the FMS. So we resume our startup. So basically this is the point now we get ready for pushback, but just before then, just one or two other things that we need to do. I'll just close this for now. So we perform our oxygen supply check. So by pressing that button, you can be able to see our oxygen supply check. We go to our EFIS panel. We set our QNH, that's our barometer settings, which we will be given by the ATIS. So when you get the ATIS, you'll be given, for now, our QNH setting is 299.2 or 1013 kilopascals. That's for our barometer to give us accurate altitude readings. Then we'll perform our lights test. So this basically just shows you all the warning lights. So you can see them there. Here. You can see overhead all the lights are working. So when we're operating the EFIS panel, you can see that all the lights are working. So we'll just leave that back to normal. So we now check our yaw dampers, which is on our overhead panel. I don't know if you can see it very well. Yeah, so we have our yaw damper here. Make sure that is turned on. Then we check that our navigation switches are set to normal. So basically we don't touch these. These are these buttons here. So we just leave them. Usually they're set to normal. We check that the displays are also set to normal. Again, we don't touch those ones. They're set to normal. You just make sure the source is there. It's on auto. It's set to normal. The control panel, 1 and 2. Then we go ahead and turn on our fuel pumps. Because we're doing a short flight, we don't need a lot of fuel. We only need roughly less than we just need roughly about 10 tons of fuel. So you can see the center tank is empty, so there's no need of turning on the fuel pump there. If you turn it on, you'll just get a low pressure warning. That means there's nothing in that tank for the fuel pump to pump. So we just leave that one as it is. So next we check our carb utility or in-flight entertainment switches are on. So we refer to this panel here. First of all, we verify that we can see DC volts is 28, AC volts there, which is what you're getting from the APU, is 115 volts. Then we make sure our cab utility, our IFE, in-flight entertainment switches are on. We can also look at the circuit breaker panel here. You can adjust the panel brightness as required. You can leave your equipment cooling setting to normal. So those are for the equipment cooling. Then now again we check our fasten seatbelt sign. Again we set that, we switch on our fasten seatbelt signs. Then we move on to the AC panel over here. On the AC panel we make sure our trim air is on. So we can have our trim air there, which is set to on. Now our packs are set to auto, but because we are going to start up the plane, we have to switch them off. Otherwise, you'll have difficulty starting the engine. Just think about it like the same as your vehicle. Typically, when you're starting your car, it's when you turn on the ignition key. If you pay attention, you notice that everything shuts off momentarily. So in this case, we have to do some of that manually. So we turn off the recirculation fans. We make sure the park switches are off. You can leave the isolation valve. You can leave that right now open. We turn off the wing anti-ice switches there. We leave the APU bleed switch on. Then we come to our altitude settings. Now this is a very important setting because you get this wrong and you will kill everybody on the plane once you get to a certain altitude. So we'll be cruising at 33,000 feet. So we set our cruising altitude here to 33,000 feet. So the cabin will automatically adjust the pressurization to 33,000 feet. Then we set our landing feet, our landing altitude here. So I'll just move this a little bit down so you can see. So we set our landing altitude there. So the ground elevation at Entebe is roughly around 3,600 or something. So we set that our landing altitude. Then we set our window heat switches. So these must always be on regardless of the temperature, whether it's hot or cold. These as a standard must always be switched on at all times, regardless of the weather, even if it's boiling hot. From here is where now we set our ignition switches. So you can either use left or right. In this case we are going to use both. We set our flight directors, we begin pushback, and then we fire up the engines. So before we do that, we have to set our auto brake to reject takeoff. So we set our brakes there to RTO. Okay, let me just set up this camera properly. So we set our ignition here, as you can see. Let me just cycle to that. So we set our ignition here to both. We're basically just going to use we set our ignition switches. We switch on our flight directors. So this is the point where we can actually even go ahead and set our autopilot settings. So we turn on our flight directors there. We're going to initially, as per our SID, we're going to head to 11,000 feet. So we're going to select a vertical speed of something that's fairly comfortable. 1800 feet per minute is fairly reasonable. We're going to set indicated airspeed for auto throttle or auto speeds, indicated airspeed to not to exceed 200 knots. We switch on our auto throttle, or rather we arm our auto throttle. Then now we, depending on where we are heading, we're going to turn the aircraft 90 degrees to the, or rather we are going to face 90 degrees to the right. So we just we remove all the ground connections. So we remove the wheel chocks. We close all the doors. And then we request pushback to face 90 degrees east. So 90 degrees is in the direction of runway 6, which is our takeoff runway. So we plug that in and we start.
And ground cockpit.
Go ahead, Captain.
We're all set to go up here. We've been cleared to push and start at your discretion.
Roger that, ready for push. Power and air are clear, doors closed. We are ready for pushback. Release parking brake, please.
So we release our parking brake.
Okay, parking brake is off, cleared to push.
And then as we are pushing back, we can start engine number 1. So we monitor.
Brakes off, here we go.
You can see it's coming up. Monitor our N1 there. So once it gets to 25%, we put in some fuel. So as that's like firing up, we do the same for number 2. Monitor the N1 there. So when it gets to 25, put in some fuel. Then usually when the engines are started up, we set it to continuous just in case, just to prevent the engine from flaming out during takeoff. That can be very dangerous, especially
right,
during
set and pressure's normal.
wet conditions. The engine,
Okay, sir, tow bar is on, pin is out.
the engine can flame out. So
Alright guys, thanks. You're cleared to
putting it on
disconnect.
continuous
We
is
will, be
a
watching for the
feature
pin
that
and the release from guidance
ensures
on the right
that
side of the
the
airplane, and we'll see you
engines
guys next
remain
time.
running during takeoff.
Roger that, have a good flight.
So we've got our engine fired up. We now basically complete the configuration. We turn on the pitot-static valves. We turn on the recirculation fan, turn on the packs. We turn on our taxi lights. Sorry, and Mark you, I forgot to turn on the anti-collision lights when we were starting the aircraft, but oh well. Just know that before you begin pushback, or just as you begin pushback when you're starting the engines, you turn on the anti-collision lights so that you can notify the ground, anybody on the ground, that you're getting ready to fire up the engines. So once we've done all that, we set our flap configuration. For this particular flight, we'll be taking off with 10 degrees flaps. You could use the heading settings. In this case, we're going to use, we're going to maintain runway heading, and then we're going to switch to LNAV, which has our SID. So for now, we can leave it on, we can select the heading selector to leave it on the runway heading once you take off. So I guess that basically concludes the fastest and easiest way to get the plane started. Just before I conclude, sorry, we now have the engines running, so we switch from APU power to the generators, the power being generated from the engines. So once you switch it by selecting those two buttons there, you have to give the APU some time to cool down. Remember, it's a turbine engine, so you don't just turn it off, you just give it some time to cool down. So as you're taxiing towards the runway, you can leave the APU cooling down, and once you're about to take off, you just turn off the APU from here. So we just have a quick overview of everything. Make sure that everything is configured properly. So we'll just start our flow and make sure that everything is configured properly for takeoff. The EFIS panel. Now we can even do our flight controls check. We do full left, full right, full forward, full backwards. We can check our rudder as well. And from here you're pretty much ready to taxi. Now, depending on what ATC will give you, you will be given a squawk code, so that this basically enables the air traffic controller to see the aircraft on the radar, so you can turn on your transponder or your TCAS there. And I guess that's it. So from here we are ready to taxi. So this concludes basic startup procedure for the Boeing 737-800 PMDG.
Switched off. 300, 200, 100, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 10.
Afisa wa karibu timu ambao watakaolaki ndege hii watafurahia kwamba mazoezi yetu yanahitaji kipande cha kwamba umefanya nasi na kwa kupata nafasi nyingine ya kusafiri nani tena. Kwa niaba ya Kenya, washirika Rubanikani pamoja nasi tunaomba kusimamia asante tukisema kama hapa mjini Nairobi na kwa abiria ambao wanasema nafasi ya asanteni na kwa for your own and comfort, enjoy this weekend. I'm sure we'll be able to come back on the bus. Will be pleased to give you any further information that you require. It is our hope that you can do that and look at the thank you and wish you a pleasant day at Nairobi.